Excellent. Well, hi, and welcome to this, the very Saturday of the week. My name's Tom Ridge, and before we kick it off, a big thank you to our sponsors. You've heard it probably a lot of times already today, but I had a lot of fantastic conversations already this conference, and that just wouldn't happen without having sponsors to put on events like this, or volunteers and organisers to ensure that it helped actually happen. So a big thank you to all of them, and a big thank you to yourselves for coming and attending this talk. You're not in the wrong room. It's very topical that I talk about being wrong. I decided that my slide title was wrong, and I was going to change it at the last minute anyway. But this story actually starts back a few years ago. My title at the time was Delivery Lead, and I'm running a remote distributed team from Adelaide in the middle of a pandemic. So we have team members all across the country, predominantly in Melbourne, some in Queensland, some in New Zealand, some in Argentina, and some in the States. And for those folks in Melbourne, it's a very bad time. Right? They're stuck in lockdown, so my kind of objective is to make their 8 hours a day of work not suck. Now we at Culture Amp, if you're unfamiliar, we make a suite of products across the employee sort of life cycle, so one-on-one tool, the employee engagement survey, which we're kind of more well known for. And at this point in time, I'm working in the performance part of our platform. So twice a year, there's a lot of delivery pressure for us as customers are running their performance review cycles to make sure that we have the right things in place. And as you can imagine, the team morale isn't great. And so I'm kind of failing at my job. And especially because we're in the middle of the second project that's well behind schedule. An initial 12-week estimate has ballooned out to 24 weeks. Right? And so not only do I have a lot of team members that can't leave their home, they're stuck pushing their noses to the grindstone on a project that's late and where there's a lot of extra stress and pressure. And we seem to be stuck in this loop because it's not the first time that it's happened. The previous project, someone quoted 6 weeks. Ended up taking multiple teams in the better part of a year. And a quick hands up if this seems familiar to you, where you get stuck in this negative feedback loop of this really large, upfront, spec'd out project, right? And someone gives an estimate and it ends up being well behind what it actually ends up being. And meanwhile, your design and your product function are having to go ahead and figure out the next suite of work. And in our case too, where there's a lot of delivery pressure for that 2 times a year, there's a lot of expectations that we have a lot of features ready for our customers to use come performance reviews season. And so with large projects, we end up seeing these things when we're rushing towards a deadline. So we'll see quality issues, because it's really hard to reason about large projects. It's really hard to spot all the things that can go wrong. And when you're rushing and cutting corners, you ship bugs. There's not many chances for us to celebrate and learn. Like, I'm trying everything that I can to give teammates like something to celebrate and something to feel good about, but it's really hard when you're behind schedule. It's really hard when they're stuck at home. One of the levers we can pull when we're behind schedule is cutting scope. You talk to a designer, and every time you say, let's take this away, we've just taken a part of their solution away, and we're hurting the integrity of that product. And then you get poor collaboration because, it's really hard to collaborate with someone when they're like 6 months ahead of you. And it's hard to respond to urgent requests. Like, if you get a sudden ask to go in and do something else, it's really hard to make that happen when you're already 3 months behind schedule on the thing that you were already supposed to deliver 3 months ago. And I really love to tell you that this didn't happen. But I know I was putting in overtime trying to get this project across the line, and I imagine a few other team members were as well. And it kind of really frustrated me, right? Because I found out that the previous release that we'd spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on, we were seeing a lot of feedback coming from customers that indicated that all the things that we thought were really important and really valuable weren't. We're wrong about what our customers want, and clearly we're wrong about how long it's going to take to build the thing. And at this time, across the organization, there's a really strong push as an organization to improve our delivery predictability. And this is my title. I'm feeling really good about my job security. But there's reason for optimism. The team's got an excellent basis of psychological safety. No matter what talk you see or what you're trying to do, if you want to make change within your teams, you need this. You need to have psychological safety. We're in a good place there, and obviously the team wants change. I don't think any of them were like, this is a good time, we should definitely continue doing it this way. And lastly, we have some new-ish leadership. The ish that our tech lead had joined us about 3 months before, but we have a new product manager, a new designer, we have some new colleagues floating around the place, and at the next level above, we have a new director of engineering and director of the camp. And that presents a little opportunity for us to kind of reset and to kind of get things back to where we want them to be. So around this time, I'm pondering, how do we get out of this? I want this to stop. And so I'm like working with the team and talking with the team about ideas. And I really kind of think back to one of the core values at Cultramp. So we have a lot of great values. Well, we have 4. We have 4 great values. But one of them that I particularly like the most is learning faster through feedback. And I think a lot of my colleagues do the right thing about taking on that feedback, seeking out that feedback and learning from it. But we don't spend enough time thinking about how to create more opportunities to receive it. And that's primarily the problem that I want to solve with our team. Who's familiar with the build, measure, learn loop? Okay, for those of you unfamiliar, generally the idea with like agile first kind of working principles and building product, right, is that we want to build something, we want to measure how well it did at the thing that we said we were going to do, like how much did we move the needle. We want to take that learning into building the next iteration. But as you can see, our build, measure, learn loop is pretty massive, so that's problematic. We want to both reduce the size of that loop, reduce the circumference of it, and go through faster. We want tighter feedback loops between us as a team and us as a customer. Right? I'm tired of going to retros every 2 weeks and not actually making any meaningful process change because I don't have projects to anchor it to. We want to end up with better quality and less risk because it's far easier for us to reason about smaller things. We can spend that time really shifting left instead of kind of having to rush to try and consider these things. And we can deliver value sooner. Like, granted, all of our customers really care about having a really good performance review product at the end of the year. But I would rather deliver them 9 out of the 10 things that we said we did, and it be valuable to them, than 0 out of 1 thing, or maybe 1 thing that is pretty crap. And I want stronger collaboration. The best teams I've worked in have a really tight collaborative environment between design, engineering, and product. That's what I want. That's what the team wants. Right? I don't think anyone going into a team going, no, I definitely do not want to work with anyone. But I still have a big problem to solve. Estimation. Now, my team and I are clearly terrible at it, but I'd argue we are collectively horrible. And the reason is that it's very easy for me to tell you where I'm going to be in 3 days, but it's really hard for me to tell you where we're going to be in 6 weeks, let alone 6 months, on a very complex piece of work, working across a number of different people, taking into account all the various complexities and all the various moving pieces of the puzzle that need to happen. Estimation is wasteful. We spend hours in refinement sessions trying to quantify how long or how much effort there is involved in something, rather than, is this going to deliver the outcome that we want for the customer? And what other ways there are there to solve this particular problem? And the trouble that I have is that estimation optimizes for correctness more than it optimizes for learning. And I want to anchor on the second. Never mind that the start of the project, or the start of the task, is when you know the least about it. And the larger the project, the worse that estimate's going to be because the more variables there are in that equation. And around the time that I was authoring this talk, I saw this going around on LinkedIn, and I had to scratch my head because we're playing this really silly game of taking these made-up numbers and then adding made-up percentages to them. And then Parkinson's law would tell us that work expands to fill the time available anyway, so we're just kind of making it artificially longer. And this is the problem, fundamentally, at the end of the day, is that estimation isn't forecasting. We're not having a look at data about a system, observing how it moves through that system, and coming up with a reasonable answer about how long something will take. We're guessing badly. But we do need to be able to communicate when something's going to be done. Ultramp is a reasonably mature organization at this point, and we have a lot of customer functions and marketing functions that kind of need to know what are we building and when is it going to be released. Fair enough, they've got their own stuff to do. So how can I deliver on time whilst acknowledging that estimation is bad? And around this time, one of my newer colleagues, Mark Barber, who's graciously agreed to be put on a rather large screen, said, oh, that's easy, just use Little's law. And I know what you're thinking. Hey, Tom, I've just eaten lunch and wasn't here for math. That's okay, I'll make it easier in a second. But just to kind of intro us a little bit, Little's law deals with queuing theory. And the idea is that we want to treat our work as a queue. And roughly, the days remaining on a project is the number of stories remaining divided by the work in progress that you have divided by your average cycle time. Let's make this a little bit easier. This is my son. And my son and I love doing Lego together. And I really love this photo because you can see the concentration on his face while he's trying to put some stuff together, and he just seems very at peace with himself and the world. But this is a pretty large, complex set, right? It's got a lot of pieces. It took us a long time to kind of put it together. And that's how I want you to think about Little's law, is that the time it's going to take you to build that Lego set is equivalent to the size of your mound of Legos, the thing that you were trying to build, and how much differentiation there is in those pieces, because the same shaped pieces are going to flow through your system much more easily than pieces that are different and fiddly and take time. So really, the time it takes for the queue to process equals the size of the queue divided by how fast the queue moves. We all saw that at the coffee cart and at lunch. So my colleague gives me this spreadsheet and says, I want you to fill this out for every single story that you do, for every single data point in your system of work, and track how long stuff takes. So I go and dutifully start filling this out while we're getting towards the tail end of this project. And I gradually end up with a sheet that looks pretty much like this. I say pretty much, it was pretty much exactly this. And then I get these calls coming back to me like, hey, when is it going to be done? I'm like, cool, I think we're close enough that I can kind of take a punt on this idea. Because I'm still pretty skeptical that you're like, hey, you're telling me I don't need to estimate and I can use math and actually get an accurate answer? Sure, let's try it. Like, what's an extra couple of weeks going to hurt at this point? But sure enough, when I checked my crystal ball and ran through that equation again, I got this answer. 15 story cards, 15 days remaining, 1.5 sprints, and that turned out to be great. So I thought, cool, can't possibly work again. I'll try it on a small project, less risk, we can do something from scratch rather than at the end of it. That was fine, no issue. Okay, cool, sure. How does it work on larger projects? Because we had a big pipeline of work coming up in a part of the product that hadn't been well utilized at this point. And just for some added context, and there's a couple of members of the audience here who can attest to it, the quality of the code base at this point in time was also pretty rubbish. I'm like, oh, cool, I've got this magic 8-ball, but it's probably going to be wrong. And then I realized that I hadn't even begun to kind of move the two levers that I had available to me to help make that right. The size of the queue and how fast it moves. If you're wondering about that size of the queue, that's really about reducing the number of stories that we have remaining in the first place, right? And to keep butchering this analogy, it's about keeping my Lego pile small. Build smaller things. Has anyone done user story mapping before? People? If you're unfamiliar, Jeff Patton somehow manages to write an actually very entertaining book on what should be the driest topic in the world. And effectively, the idea is working from left to right, it is a story. It's a journey that your user is taking through your system from their start to their end, they accomplish the goal that they want to take. And top to bottom is the priority in which you should build the things. So for example, you'll start with your walking skeleton. So to give you a concrete example of that from last week, before we could start building some features on a new system, we needed to integrate a couple of systems together, and so that's part of our walking skeleton. But actually building the API endpoints and enabling the functionality might be part of your first release, or your second, or your third. This isn't our board, but this is a good example of someone else is taking this idea and using it in Jira. There are other options available. I like Miro. I like lo-fi stuff where I can move stuff around pretty well. But you can see how it's broken up into your user activities from left to right, and your MVP, and then your release to, and then whatever else is going from there. And what this enables us to do is at any point after that MVP or those releases, we can switch, we can pivot, we can go pick up the next more valuable opportunity if we need to. Right? We can also make good decisions about what our architecture should be because we probably have a pretty good idea about what's next without necessarily over-committing up front. The other thing it enables us to do is when you engage the whole team in this activity, it allows us to build shared understanding between team members, so we're all kind of operating from the same whys and hows as we're building this up. Allows us to focus on outcomes rather than output, right? It's really hard sometimes to take a very spec'd out or high fidelity design and kind of unsee that through your problem solving process. But stickies are easy, right? That enables better collaboration. We'd see from this that invariably after one of these sessions, our front-end engineers and our designers would go away and actually work on some very lo-fi kind of wireframes in Excalibur. And that was great because then they could work through the interactivity of that feature together without necessarily over-committing to anything. And it helps us get to wrong sooner, right? If we're slicing in those releases and we're releasing it truly iteratively, right? We can get that feedback coming back in that build, measure, learn loop and go, yeah, cool, we're wrong about this. Let's go tweak it, let's change it. But what about the second part of the equation? Let's talk about work in progress limits. You might think that actually having a lot of work in progress would mean that you go faster through that loop, but that is not the case. You want to keep that limit low, right? And the reason you want to keep that limit low is because the more work in progress you have, and you've all seen this probably in your own teams where everyone's working on their own thing, and it takes you, 2 days to get a code review, and you just try to get it to production. Or something urgent's come across the desk, and all of a sudden you have to context switch. You don't have time for experimentation, you don't have time for learning, right? We need to keep a certain amount of capacity free in our teams, right? If you've got monitoring and alerting that says when your servers go at 100% CPU, why are you letting your teams get that way? The next part of the equation is cycle time. Does anyone here know what cycle time is? Oh, this is great. All right, this is good feedback because then I can actually focus on it. So cycle time is how long it takes from something to go from in progress to done. So if we recall my little spreadsheet example before where we looked at each of the gates and how long it spent there, we can go, cool, it spends about a day in code review, it spends about a day in QA, and maybe about 3 days in progress. And from that, we can add those values up to go, cool, the cycle time from in progress to done is 5 days. And that's the other data point that we want to kind of optimize for. because there's one other problem, and that's variability. I don't know if, depending on how many folks here use Jira, this is called the control chart. I don't know why it's called that. It doesn't control anything. But that blue band is how much variability you have in your cycle time as you're delivering cards. And what you want to try and optimize for is to get that as thin as possible. The reason being is that that variation in your cycle time, your average cycle time, forms your upper bound of your delivery forecasting system. And so, if you're not careful about controlling that cycle time variability, there's a very big difference between 1.5 sprints and 4.8. And that's a very hard conversation to have with your stakeholders when they're like, when's it going to be due? You're like, well, between 2 weeks and 5 months. Apparently I can't math. So the next part of the problem really for us is how do we minimize that variance, right? How do we make sure that our Lego bricks are mostly the same size and shape? I say mostly, right? One other thing to keep in the back of your mind is no matter what we do, we want this to serve the team, right? So if you're going to go like all the way towards making the Lego bricks the same size, but it takes you 3 years to develop anything, then it's not working. If it's causing team stress, it's probably not working. But we want to try and optimize to try and get them the same size and shape as much as possible. And so there's a couple of different things we can look at. How much capacity do we actually have? How does work actually enter our system? Right? How do we make sure that the work coming in is appropriately sized and shaped and thought about? And how work flows through that system. Like, how can we make sure that as it's going through, we're optimizing for that flow? We're enabling it to move through readily. And for us, that was this: slicing, refinement, and backlogs. So in our refinement session, it's a pool-style system. So if you're unfamiliar, right, we have a prioritized backlog. Towards the top are generally stuff that's ready to go. The cards belong to the team. So any team member can take that card, pick it up, and pull it into in progress, as long as we're not exceeding our work in progress limits. But as you go down that list, those cards are less refined, there's less detail out, and they may need to be sliced further. But that's where we spend our time in refinement. We'll examine those cards. Do we need to create discovery items? Do we actually understand what needs to go here? Is it in the right priority order? But I only want to keep a maximum of around about 6 weeks worth of backlog ready to go at any one point. Any more than that, and you start sort of making technical decisions that by the time you get to them are often invalid or need to change, creating waste in your system. And so for us, by sort of focusing on this sort of like pull system and really focusing on a refinement process where we're clear on things like what do we need to do to make sure that this is ready to be picked up? Like what acceptance criteria we have, what are the things we need to test for, what are the things that we are worried about with this piece of work? It ironically meant less meetings. Even though we'd spent an hour and a half in refinement, because when it pulled in, everyone knew what was going on, everyone knew why they were doing it, and everyone knew at least at a high level how we're going to accomplish it. It gave us less risk, because we actually were able to shift left on quality. We're able to shift left on security through that process of refinement and think about the things that we wanted to test and wanted to think about. And this was the same at a story level as it was all the way up for an epic or an initiative. We'd be thinking about that stuff from the get-go. Like I said, less time spent in meetings overall. The next step is slicing. Has anyone here engaged in an elephant carpaccio workshop? I see Joel absolutely just like, ah. Right? So, the effective idea, I don't know, we didn't, the joke goes like, how do you eat an elephant? One slice at a time. So, for us, what we did was we take like some vague kind of like product idea and we just look at all the different ways we could slice that up so we could end up with as many thin slices of work as possible. But what made it stick for us and what might help you in your own teams if you're thinking about introducing change of any kind is that we took the outcomes of this workshop and immediately put them into practice the next day. And that really helped the learning stick for us. And so for us, when we slice a card, when we go, hey, we think this is too big, we want to kind of make it smaller, we do an estimate. But there's a bit of a difference, right? Who knows what they're doing tomorrow without thinking, yeah, cool, thank you. Right? If I go to someone and go, hey, it's about 3 days worth of work, and they spend any longer than like half a second going yes or no, right, we're not doing our job. I just want them to think about it quickly. It's less an estimate and more like kind of like a guardrail for going, maybe we need to spend a bit more time thinking about this so that we can determine if we need to slice it. Because sometimes the answer was no, but that was valid. Right? I'm seconded into a team at the moment. There's a lot of novel work going on. So in those cases, it's actually more important for us just to put in place good kind of guardrails and good feedback loops so we can keep an eye on it as it's working through that system and hopefully move it through faster. But in other cases, nah, let's slice, right? Let's make it about 3 days worth of work. And there's different ways you can slice, and this is really going to be the engine that you're going to use to try and same-size everything so you get more data points about how something flows through your system and thus can actually forecast. So we look at things like roles. So for us, that might be we have admins that can do a lot of stuff, and then HR business partners that can only do stuff for a certain department. So we might break up the card that way. Or we might look at function. So if you've got like a feature card and it's like, hey, we need to be able to do this and this and this, and then the user can export this, cool, slice that way. And then I'd look for seams. So if there's an and or a but or an unless, great, slice. Make it as small as practicable and no smaller. And really, every part of my system of work, I'm really optimizing for learning, and I'm really optimizing for these short feedback cycles. Right? And if you haven't read it yet, Lean Software Development's an old book. It's like 20 years old at this point, right? Which made me feel old. But it's a fantastic book, especially if you're a newer, like, more senior engineer or technical lead or engineering manager. It gives you lots of really practical advice, but one of the best takeaways is that, you know, you can learn most effectively by actually creating more of those feedback cycles, right? Creating really tight, small feedback loops or more opportunities for that feedback. So for us, once we sliced at that point and once we went through the refinement, once we did all that, right? And it sounds like a lot. Well, at that stage, we're a pretty well-oiled machine and we could just execute it quickly. No matter what the level of engineer, too. And we still had bottlenecks, right? We still have things that just went wrong, right? We're the world's worst scientists, so sometimes we just get stuff wrong, and that's fine. What you want to do then is like create like visual markers so you can see how long something's been in those columns, and if they're exceeding your reasonable allowances, then you can have a discussion about it, right? Or you can review it fortnightly and then bring it to the team, or you can swarm on it. Right? Sometimes the quickest way to move something through your system of work is actually to get it to done rather than starting something new. Cool. We've got all those ingredients. Now we can forecast. And then so for us, that meant that we could really kind of easily kind of pull that data in and give really good answers to when something was going to be done. You can see over time too, addressing that variance, that line in the red, means that like on average, yeah, it took us about 4 days to do something with about 2 days variance, and that's about as far as I wanted to push it. Because any further than that, and I'm just hurting the team or wasting the team's time. We're still bad at estimating. Turns out that 3 days worth of work was 5 days pretty consistently. Right, but we're consistently frequently wrong, and when the train comes every 5 minutes, no one cares about the schedule. We're also consistently and frequently learning. What happened to us? Well, you know, instead of one release a year, we started going to monthly releases. And every time we release a Coltramp, we do a gong, right? And do you know how good it feels to have a free team lunch once a month instead of like once a year? I had to go on a diet. It was great. But importantly, if you cast your mind back to where the team was at the start of this, the team was less stressed, right? And we were delivering huge amounts of value. Bottlenecks were addressed in our team and in the company, right? The quality of our product improved. We didn't worry about bugs in our releases, or if they did come up, cool, we could address them straight away, right? But more importantly, conversations with our stakeholders became about, hey, how are you measuring the value of this? Instead of, when is it going to be done already? And even better, like more experimentation. Some of the stuff that we produced out of this project has now spread company-wide. Right? And we couldn't have done that if we didn't have lower work in progress limits and a better system for managing our own work and keeping that stress off the team. More team celebrations and learning. And it's worked in other teams too, right? I've taken this and applied this to teams that were platform teams and turned them into product teams very quickly. We've created a system that delivers consistent streams of value when we say we're going to. So how can you do this yourself? Measure, right? Start measuring and start getting those data points in front of you so you can make informed decisions. Start looking for ways to slice your work all the way up and down the value chain. So like your epics, your initiatives, your features, and optimize that queue. It doesn't always work. Like if you're working on brand new stuff, like it doesn't always give you that forecasting that you're gonna want because you're gonna naturally have that variance, but you're gonna have the data to back that up. And it's always better to come to those stakeholder conversations with actual data. And there's a little bit of a postscript. I've been seconded to another team. So a while back, I shifted back to staff engineering. I wouldn't say I'd stopped caring about delivery stuff, but it was mostly sort of switched off while we did some other projects. And unbeknownst to me, one of my colleagues that was also friends with Mark had sort of taken this spreadsheet when we talked about it and turned it into a full automated thing on a whole other side of the company. And they're using it day in, day out, which was a really nice kind of find. For some recommended resources, my friend Michelle Playfair gives a great talk called Is It Done Yet? How About Now? She also talks about probabilistic forecasting, Monte Carlo method, that sort of stuff. Really recommend it. She's an amazing human. Neil Killick's Slicing Heuristics talk is a really good talk to get an idea about how to structure and slice your projects. Alan Hulub's No Estimates, and the Lean Software Development Book and Agile Toolkit. I do have a link there to the spreadsheet tool itself. If you are interested in that and that general idea, please come find me and talk to me. I'm really keen to sort of hear how people are doing delivery. My name's Tom Ridge. I do have Attack Eyebrows. You can find me there on LinkedIn, but I would really most appreciate it, most of all, if you could leave me some feedback about this talk at the end, anything that I can do to improve or to tweak it for next time, I'd really, really value. So thank you. You've been a lovely audience.